All right. Yeah, so I have a very large proxy application, and I started using that. I started using that kind of browser UI, library because it's very simple, right? And then also, like, I was going to be cooperating with somebody who's not terribly great, not terribly experienced at programming. So. Yeah, like I got it started, and then we kind of just added new pages everywhere, and it was great. Like even though my partner was very inexperienced with programming, still highly productive with the Elm architecture. Like I'm wondering if I should like show the Elm architecture. Does anybody not know what the Elm architecture is here? Okay, yeah. I don't need to do that then. But yeah, it's like you separate your components into, your entire app then into an update and a view function. And then you also want to have a single state type for this entire application. Right. But as time went on, I became quite frustrated with a few things. And I believe that if like anybody who has used the Elm architecture before is already very well aware of these. And if you try and complain about them to experienced Elm users, they'll just like be bored because they're already aware of the frustrations with it. But and I believe that some people are very happy making that trade-off of having frustrated restrictions, because what they get is, like I say, it's very easy to write. So the Elm architecture is like the model and this update and the view. And there's lots of reasons to love. It's easy to understand. Because there's only one state atom, it's very easy to get like this time travel debugging and hot module reloading. Because I believe for hot module reloading, which is a kind of a feature of bundlers like Webpack, is you have to save state and then load state again inside every module that gets updated. So if all your modules are stateless, then you can very easily hot reload that one module, which is pretty neat. Yeah, and it's like it's really easy to use, very easy. But then there's things to dislike. Because there's only a single state atom, you can't have components which maintain their own state. You can't have components which have opaque state. If you absolutely need that, then you have to have something like halogen is a place to go. Right, I've talked to some people that say if you absolutely need it, you'll just write a second application that's built using this Elm architecture and just embed it as if it was a single HTML element. But I've never done that stuff because, one, it's not easy, and if you're using this Elm architecture, you want easy. Yeah, and there is a way to get semi-encapsulated components, but there's a lot of wiring. And maybe I have an example, I'm not sure, but it's a lot of wiring. Yeah, and the documentation on the Elm architecture, it explains the architecture itself, but it doesn't put any context into when it's good to use this architecture, what types of applications. It's very light on any criticisms of itself, which is understandable, especially if you want to like do consulting around it and you want everybody to buy in. I don't know. I just think it's there's some parts of it is built on some things that are. I'll give some reasons why I'm skeptical of it. Not all of them is completely entirely valid, but it's still nice to be aware of. Like the duplicated DOM state. This one's just the nature of using the VDOM, and as I understand it, like the Elm architecture is only possible because of the virtual DOM system of updating the DOM. Like, yes, yeah. So, and it's in the nature of the virtual DOM that you have to rebuild the entire desired tree of your application, and then perform the diff and apply it to the DOM. And I think that it's not necessary. Like the DOM already has an API into it, so you can just query the state of the DOM in the browser if you need to do some things, and just having a sufficiently flexible type system should allow you to do this stuff flexibly without needing to resort to jQuery style event listeners and not being sure what types things are. Yes, but virtual DOM is not terrible. I mean, it makes things very simple, very easy. But there are times, which people never told me when I got into virtual DOM stuff, where it's better to just not store something on the state. Like if you have a very big text box with particular formatting, and if you copy and paste stuff out, like the diffing algorithm for the virtual DOM will like maybe lose track of cursor position. And yes, like I don't know, maybe I'm just not good at web stuff, but there's some trickiness. It's not bulletproof. And that's all fine. But the reason I bring that up is that in the PureScript community, there are some alternatives to the virtual DOM. So you can program as if you're having a desired state tree, like what the virtual DOM does, but you're not using the virtual DOM. You're not duplicating all of every DOM element in JavaScript memory. And the Phil's Purview library and SDOM library are some ideas towards this direction. They're still new. I don't think anybody's using them to build anything great or build anything big. And yeah, but I don't have any experience with these, but I'd like to explore them. So if you, yeah, I recommend taking a look. Then the other more tangible complaint I have with the Elm architecture is that if you want to update your state, you must trigger this update through like one of the update actions. And the update action is usually a sum type that lists every possible action. And in general, for a specific, I think this is a very good pattern for a specific thing, because if all of the actions in the sum type represent user commands to update the state, then this is very readable. It's very good. But if you have a button that you press a button and then you want to make an XHR to get some data from the server, this is asynchronous. If you want to take this data from the server, put it onto your state, you must send this data back to your state through an update function. So now all of your list of actions now is polluted with this system internal plumbing stuff. And I wish it wasn't. But yeah, some people are just perfectly happy with this. But it's the reason I bring it up is because there is an alternative. Yeah, here's an example of how that works. Yeah, but there's an alternative. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, so is this the monadic one? But yeah, there's the PureScript concur library, which instead of this, I think somebody called the Elm architecture as like a functorial style of Elm UI updating system. There's this monadic system in PureScript concur, which allows you to do render this DOM, and then presume that a certain value comes out of that DOM when a certain action happens, and then because it's in a monadic sequence of events, you can take the let's see. Yeah, render the home page on that user, and that returns like a user action. So assume on the home page you have a few different actions that can be performed in a sum type. Whichever specific action out of those possible actions can be sent in this user action, and then based on which action, you can replace that DOM area with something new specifically. So if they click if they clicked on an article and you want to load an article and render that article, you will handle that separately. Yeah, so you'll get the article. Once you have the article in hand, then you just you re-render the home page with that article on it. And you notice here that this get article thing is just an XHR, and you can treat it as a sibling, like as a same type of action as rendering the page itself. And in doing so, you don't need to pollute your global list of user commands with such plumbing. I've not used this myself, but again, it's something I'd like to play with to get more experience with. I just want to raise the attention that there's different ways of doing things than the Elm way of doing it.
Could you elaborate on that a bit, exactly what you mean? I missed here something.
Yeah.
Because you're saying, okay, we have the user action, which...
Well, the home page here is of type HTML, and it returns a type of action. So such an action would be chosen based on some event emitted from the DOM, and then you'd capture that and wrap it into this, and choose a specific type of action that was picked. So like when this first statement is executed, then this entire sequence of events stops, and it's kind of like a continuation.
So when the first, again, say that sentence again?
Like this is presuming that the type of this app is a monad that behaves like a continuation. So that you execute one instruction, and then the rest of the instructions just wait, right? And then once this first instruction produces a value, then you can take that value and do the next step.
But what happens if, so we're actually waiting on that user action.
Right.
So if I have an application that is loading, the canonical Elm example is that GIF loader, right?
Yes.
Loads the GIF. So if I have, except for that place where I'm going to render my GIF and I'm waiting for the server side to return, let's have an additional additional things to do on the page. Like I have a counter, the plus minus label. So that will render that. So it's going to freeze my UI.
Well, if there's a counter, then I presume that this HTML thing, each tick might, like that would be one of the actions here.
And that will, but how will that go with the HTTP request?
So you're saying that after this home page produces an action, it can't render that, it can't do an action there again?
I'm asking because I'm not that, I don't understand too well how all that fits together.
Mm-hmm.
But what I understand what you said, that's actually going to wait for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I click on reload the GIF, and then I start clicking on the pluses of the counter,
mm-hmm.
then the pluses aren't going to increment the number until I get the GIF back. Or did I miss something?
I think the context here is slightly different, right? Like I'm assuming, Alex, that this sort of runs in like app and coroutines basically. So you can have multiple of these sort of, like Redux Saga, you can have multiple of these running the same method. It's easy to screw yourself up, right? Like you can start overriding things because the user double clicks something, now you're going to do request, and so you have to handle all those sort of stuff.
Okay, so what would be the advantage of that over the Elm commands?
This is way more synchronous looking.
Synchronous looking.
For me, that's what that is.
Because the problem with Redux, if it's analogous to Redux sagas, the main problem with Redux sagas is that you completely lose context of the state machine of your front end app. Like you have no idea what's happening when and when things are going to come in.
Right. Same thing there. You don't
So
know how
you
many
have
of
the
these
same
things.
problem.
You don't know how many of those things are being triggered.
Okay.
Like it really could look like 30 times. If you don't have the handlers for that setup to say only process one of those events and this is the amount of time, real 30 requests go.
Yeah, well, at least this is the PureScript concur library. It has some examples. One compelling use case for this model is the loading indicator. You know how you push the button and it takes some time to fetch from the server? And then while it's fetching, you want to display a loading message, right? And then when it comes back, you want to remove the loading message, render something else. So in a situation like this, like you'll run the text button program. Wait a second. Where'd it go? Let's see how that works. Show post, fetch post. Yeah, so this show posts will be a text button. And then when this text button is clicked, then this fetch posts program is executed. And that fetch post program is just the generic monad, so that's such that you can sequence. It's basically what monad means. Yeah, so you can log, do your XHR, and then before you do your XHR, you can render a replacement button. You can like render a.
That's on the right hand side, the alternative.
The alternative on the right.
So this one will render until that comes back, I believe. And then once the response is back, then you can do your processing. This is all happens inline. So like any sequential program, it can get out of hand potentially. But it's nice to know that such a thing exists. I think it's interesting.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I appreciate asking questions. Oh golly. Here. Yeah, so like I mentioned, this piece, like there's other ideas that might be better or worse depending on what you're looking for and what you want to maintain and such, and what you think is simple or hard. Yeah, and then like accidental effects might make that such a monadic program more tractable. Yeah, and the reason that these two things are different is that Elm treats view rendering as separate from it keeps them all separate, which I think is an architectural decision. And if you want to keep them separate, that's one way to grow your program. The other thing that's wrong, that I think is really weird about using the Elm architecture is it doesn't really think about URLs at all, which is not unlike any front-end framework. Like I don't know, like some front-end frameworks, like they'll have a solution for everything. But React, it doesn't consider the URL. It just presumes that you know how to do architecture yourself well enough, right? And like Elm is similar. Like it doesn't consider the URL. But the reason that if you want to re-render based on a URL, then you have to watch the URL, and when it changes, then you just redraw your page. So the URL, like every route that you want to handle, needs to be in your Elm app. Like it has to be in that root module, because your Elm app can only be one app. You can't like split it. Right, but like in any big website, you're not going to handle every single route inside one component, like inside one handler. On server side, yeah, maybe you can, but like if you're going to be handling your routes inside, like for me, I'm using Pucks, and I parse the route, and I do that all inside of this one app. So anytime I want to add a new page, the easiest path forward, of course, is to just add a new thing into Pucks, and Pucks just renders the next page, of course. But what I would prefer would be that static pages, I don't have to bring in Pucks. I just want to get a string of HTML and put it on the page. Because like on my website, I have like a lot of static pages. It's just for like information, right? Like, yeah. Well, it's just this is why I was talking about architecture earlier. It's like nobody talks about how to do web architecture. People just say, let's just use this framework and you'll be okay. It's like, yeah, for a certain number of pages, but then you got to start thinking about architecture. Unless you think about architecture up front, then you're going to feel pain later. Like this is why I'm interested in architecture. Like, yeah, if I did a URL first, then perhaps my pain would be later. If I separated my handler, like my framework, from the URL program, from the URL parser and all that such, then I might be much happier. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this is like why I think like the Elm architecture isn't. It's not the web architecture, and it's important to realize that. But of course, you can render a single Elm app inside of a single page for a web architecture. And if you talk to people who have very, very large websites in Elm, they subsection out their website into several small Elm apps. And like, I don't know, it's too late for me, I guess. Um, oh yeah, then code splitting. This is the other thing. You can't do it in the Elm architecture. You can't. I thought you could. That's why I kept growing it and growing it. It's like at some point I'll just add code splitting. Like it's Webpack. You just put your JavaScript in Webpack. It'll code split for you. But I can't make it work because like lazy loading routes is what I want. And if you want lazy loading routes, you have to explicitly architect your app in a certain way such that a route, its handler and implementation is asynchronous. But Elm architecture, you got to think real hard about how to do this. And like, nobody's done it before. Like nobody in PureScript land has done like the lazy loading routes in Elm architecture. So if you need lazy loading routes and code splitting for those, you're going to have to do some serious innovation. Yeah, and like the docs for the Elm architecture, not a word. Like they say that like in the next like 19 of Elm, like it'll support lazy loading and code splitting, but I found zero discussion about how they're going to do this. I'm very interested. It's going to have to be something at the language level, I believe. Interesting, important to note. That's all. There's ways that you can express lazy loading modules in PureScript, but it's in a hacky way, and you're going to have to do some interesting innovations. Yeah, I really wish that in PureScript language somebody would figure out how to do lazy loading modules in a type-safe way. Yeah, I think this depends on first-class modules, which there's like Simon Peyton Jones has a paper for that in Haskell. I think it never took traction in Haskell because of it requires records, PureScript has, as well as a few other things. So it might be feasible in PureScript. Yeah, I think there's some complications around type classes that's not figured out, and I think that's the only thing. But yeah, it's important to know. If you want lazy loading stuff, you're going to have to architect outside the purview of PureScript. I feel like this. Yeah, and the Elm architecture expects every route is like synchronously rendered. Like the view function is synchronous. Yeah, it's just not great. Oh yeah, and then like the third-party components. I had a hard time doing it because in Pux it uses a React renderer in the back end, and this complaint might not be about the Elm architecture exactly. It might only be about this specific implementation I used. The Pux implementation I used supports importing third-party React classes as if they were a normal HTML element, and then rendering them. But if you do so, any events or actions, if they do non-standard, unexpected events or actions, those won't always, sometimes you can't get those threaded back into the single event handling system that Pux has. So you got to do some hacks. Yeah, and like those are all my complaints, but I think they're all valid complaints. And the reason I point these out is Elm architecture is not perfect, and it depends how big of an app you want to build. But there are alternatives if you want to be fully educated before choosing Elm architecture. There are other alternatives to it. You probably want to explore Halogen. You probably want to explore completely different rendering systems completely, like this monadic one that is Concur, or maybe one of the incremental ones like Panda, or maybe just you want to do, so yeah. But there's other alternatives, I just want to say. Yeah, that's all I've got to say. So if anybody has any questions, I have a lot of experience I can answer.
I was just curious, I'm not super familiar with first-class modules. Like, what does that mean exactly, and what type
You can assign a module to a name. So you can like import Prelude, and then you can say, okay, let X equals import Prelude.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then X is a type of record where the label, like the name of it, is the function name, and the type is the type of that function.
Oh,
That's what it would feel like to use it.
able to,
Lazy load a module.
yeah, like what is that?
So yeah, so if you use those. I thought I had that here, system.import. But yeah, there's like the ES6 like system.import. Yeah, there's like, ES6 system.import. Otherwise, they're required to ensure these two different ways that Webpack understands, such that if you use this syntax, it will like cut and make a new bundle with everything inside there. And then whenever that code runs, it executes some Webpack code to fetch from the server that bundle and then run it. So effectively what this buys you is that everything that's inside that lazy loaded thing doesn't get sent on whenever the parent's thing is rendered on the page. So it's like much smaller sizes of front-end applications.
Well, I don't know about Pugs, but like Halogen, right? I would perhaps asynchronously go fetch a Halogen, like some bundle that has my Halogen component that would just, when it returns, basically just mount and run.
Yeah.
I don't know, like I would necessarily need a first, like I don't know if what the like first class module would buy me, because I just need it to run, like whatever it is, come back and just mount my component and run it. Yeah.
It sounds like it would just make it compatible with like the existing Webpack syntax for doing that.
It's like, do it your own, I guess, right? Go do next thing fetch. And then email your code to particular ID or something where you need that.
Let's integrate with the type system mostly instead of just emailing.
Yeah.
Email sells tons of things, but it's also pretty principle.
Yeah.
Oh, did you say that you would fetch a text file and then eval it to get a Halogen thing to work?
Yeah, I'm not exactly like sure what I haven't even considered lazy loading at this point, but I
Yeah.
imagine I've got some like component. I think if we kind of model like a route would be some component that would be split up into some bundle, and when I hit that route, go fetch that, that bundle, which it all really essentially needs to do is run my like Halogen main, right? Or
Right.
Some init.
Right.
And I guess maybe like the first class module support would just allow you to say something like,
It's just more type safe. That's all.
say like, hey, this thing has a main, like run it.
Yeah.
I guess it could.
If you just presume it has a main, you can do that. I think that'll work. That's what I was planning on doing. If like PHP doesn't get, I can't find a better way. Just get some object, presume it has a main, and just like execute it. Like that works too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can try Halogen with Pugs. Question of the room or
Well, Halogen, you can do type-safe parent-child components. So that a single component can have its own internal state. And that can be accessed by a parent component, I believe, right? Like a parent component, it can look at the child component state and can do queries and such. In Pucks, you only have one component. And that component has state. So that's just like Halogen has one component. And the component definition component difference between component and an element, I think, is a component has state that it manages as like a state machine kind of way. Whereas in Pucks, you can only do one component. There's no way to do have one Pucks component, another Pucks component, and like nest them in a parent-child way. There's no way for it. Yeah, there's ways to do similar, but you're still managing all the state on the parent. Like the child components are just borrowing a part of the parent's component state. That's how it works in Pucks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No other questions, right? I think we're good then. Yeah.